They had picked out the bedrooms, the backyard swing set, the exact color they wanted the curtains to be. They had toured properties behind my back, taken measurements, and even discussed who would get which room. My sister Emily wanted the one with the morning sun for her yoga mat. Her kids, Ava and Max, would take the one with the bunk beds. Chris, her husband, had ideas for the basement. My parents had the gall to suggest which days they'd come help watch the kids. And none of it included asking me. Not once. I didn't find out because someone slipped up. I found out because I overheard my mother saying, "Rachel won't mind. She doesn't really need all that space for just herself." That sentence cracked something in me. Not loudly, not all at once, but like the slow shatter of something once whole, an identity maybe, or trust, or whatever fragile thread had kept me tethered to the idea that my family respected me as a person. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Boulder, Colorado. I work as a financial advisor for a sustainable energy firm. My days are measured by strategy meetings, spreadsheets, and careful calculation. My life, too, has been a series of quiet, disciplined investments, some emotional, some financial, all intentional. I don't live extravagantly. I don't crave noise or chaos or public praise. I live for the feeling of a clean room at dawn, the click of my keyboard in the silence of a productive morning, and the scent of lavender rising from a cup of evening tea. Some people climb mountains to feel free. I build silence, structure, and security. I'm also the younger sister. Emily is 4 years older, with the kind of presence that fills a room before she even speaks. Growing up, she was adored, bright, expressive, effortlessly likable. When she danced, people clapped. When she struggled, the world bent to cushion her fall. When she failed, someone else picked up the tab. Always. Our parents never said it aloud, but the favoritism was a living thing. It showed up in shiny Christmas gifts, in private school tuition, in the unspoken belief that Emily's joy was the family's joy, and my contentment was simply my responsibility. Emily got married young. She and Chris have 2 kids now, and they live in a suffocating 2-bedroom apartment in Fort Collins. Their life is a revolving door of broken appliances, overdue bills, and shouted mornings. Every family dinner is the same. Emily sighs through every bite of food, listing her newest battles: the rent, the daycare, the tantrums, the traffic, the things she doesn't have, the things she needs, the things we should all understand. I sit quietly. I nod. I ask polite questions and refill water glasses. I'm the responsible one, after all, the one who has it together, the one who gets left to last. But I wasn't idle. For nearly 7 years, while everyone assumed I was simply comfortable, I was building a life with methodical care. I paid off student loans early. I skipped big vacations, mended my own clothes, drove the same car through 3 different jobs. I turned down nights out, ignored impulse buys, and funneled every bonus and side gig paycheck into 3 accounts: housing, investments, and emergency. The dream? A home of my own. Not a mansion. Not a 4-bedroom suburban showpiece, just a quiet cottage near nature, a place where I could grow herbs, read books in a sunroom, and maybe, just maybe, start each day without someone asking me to carry their weight too. That dream was supposed to be mine. I'd found it in Telluride. A modest 2-bedroom home with cedar siding, a sun-drenched porch, and a backyard that begged for raised garden beds. The moment I saw it, I knew. It wasn't just a house, it was a full exhale after years of holding my breath. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my friends. Not even my parents. I wanted to wait until everything was finalized, until it was real and signed and irreversible. But during a Sunday dinner, while everyone was complaining about grocery prices and Emily's dryer breaking again, I made a mistake. I smiled while scrolling through listings on my phone. Emily noticed. "What's got you smiling?" she asked, stabbing her salad. I hesitated, then decided to share a piece of my joy. "I'm house hunting. I found a place I might buy next month." There was a beat of silence, then another. My mother's fork hit her plate a little too hard. "By yourself?" I nodded. "Yes. I've been saving. It's time." Emily blinked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "How many bedrooms?" "Two. Just two," she repeated, confused. "Yes. For you?" "Yes." It was subtle, but I felt the shift. The way my mother's smile dropped, the way my dad cleared his throat and stared down at his plate, the way Emily looked not disappointed, but offended. That was when it began. Over the next week, I received text after text from my mother and Emily, links to 4-bedroom homes in family-friendly neighborhoods, houses near good schools, spacious kitchens, perfect for holidays. One message from Emily even said, "If you get this one, the kids could have their own rooms. We'd be so grateful." Grateful, as if the decision had already been made, as if my life was theirs to arrange. And the worst part? I almost didn't question it. That's what shook me the most. The way my reflex was to make space, to accommodate, to minimize my own needs because theirs sounded louder. But something inside me, something buried under years of polite obedience, rose up like a wave. And it whispered, "No, not this time." Because I hadn't spent 7 years building a future just to become someone else's lifeboat. I hadn't saved every penny to be guilt-tripped into buying a solution for problems I didn't cause. I hadn't sacrificed stability, sleep, and small joys for the sake of fulfilling someone else's entitlement. So I did the unthinkable. I said nothing more. I didn't engage. I didn't explain. I quietly submitted my offer, signed the contract, and set my moving date. The house was mine, legally, emotionally, entirely, and none of them knew. Now, before I tell you what happened when I finally revealed the truth, I need to ask for your support. If this story has struck a nerve, if you've ever felt unseen, used, or like the responsible one expected to sacrifice, please subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything and gives us the motivation to keep sharing stories that matter, that move, that mirror the lives we live but rarely speak about. And I have a question for you. If you had just secured the home of your dreams after years of planning and saving, and found out your family expected to move in without ever asking, what would you do? Would you, A, say yes, thinking family always comes first, B, say no, protecting your peace even if it means being called selfish? Leave your answer, A or B, in the comments. I want to know what kind of boundaries you draw and where your breaking point might be. Now, let me take you deeper into what happened next, because my silence didn't protect me. It only delayed the explosion. The morning I realized I could finally afford the house, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like stillness. Not the kind of stillness that comes from things being quiet, but the kind that follows years of motion, years of planning, sacrifice, recalculating, delaying gratification. The kind of stillness you don't notice until it wraps around you slowly, like sunlight creeping across a floor. I sat at my small desk in my Boulder apartment, logged into my banking dashboard, and ran the numbers one last time. The screen lit up with everything I had worked for, my housing fund now over the threshold I'd set years ago. Enough for the down payment, for closing costs, for the early mortgage months. Enough to buy myself the next chapter without fear clawing at my heels. I made myself tea, not the celebratory champagne moment you'd expect, just a warm cup of something quiet. I sat by the window with that tea and watched the neighbor's golden retriever roll around in the melting spring snow. That was what I wanted: peace in motion, life without crisis, joy that didn't ask for attention. Telluride had never left my mind since that trip 2 years ago. A 3-day weekend where I'd hiked in silence, browsed handmade ceramics, and watched strangers wave to each other like the world was still small enough to care. I remember walking past a row of cottages near the edge of town and thinking, not wistfully, not desperately, but clearly, I want this. Not just the place, but the feeling. The permission to live slowly, meaningfully. The house I found wasn't flashy. 2 bedrooms, wood-paneled exterior, slightly uneven stone path leading to the porch. The listing photos showed sunlit corners, shelves already attached to the walls, a fireplace that looked like it remembered stories. The backyard was a tangle of overgrowth and potential. A single white trellis, barely standing, marked the place where someone had once tried to grow tomatoes. It was perfect. That day. I emailed the real estate agent, scheduled a viewing, and began organizing my financial documents. And still, I told no one. I didn't need advice. I didn't want warnings. I certainly didn't want opinions. But I made one mistake. It was a small smile, a moment of softness, one of those private flickers of happiness that escapes before you can catch it, and Emily saw it. We were at our parents' house in Fort Collins for Sunday dinner. The usual gathering, my mom chopping garlic bread in the kitchen, my dad fiddling with the barbecue out back, Emily complaining about the upstairs neighbors while her kids tore through the living room like tiny tornadoes. Ava had lost a shoe. Max was crying because his apple juice wasn't in the red cup. Chris sat quietly, checking emails, pretending not to exist. It was during dessert, store-bought cheesecake, too sweet, too much, that I pulled out my phone and reopened the listing. I just wanted to see it again, maybe to reassure myself it was real. I smiled. "What's got you all lit up over there?" Emily asked, a teasing edge to her voice. She reached for her wine glass with the other hand, not even looking at me fully. I paused, considered a lie, then said the truth. "I'm house hunting." The room didn't go silent. It froze. My mom stopped mid-chew. My dad, who had just walked in with a tray of grilled corn, glanced up like he'd misheard. Emily turned slowly towards me. "House hunting?" she repeated. I nodded. "I've been saving for years. I'm planning to buy something soon. In Telluride." "For you?" my mom asked. The question hit me strangely. Not, "What are you looking for?" or "What's your budget?" But, "For you?" Like that was unexpected. "Yes," I said calmly. "For me?" My dad spoke first, setting the tray down. "That's a big step, Rach." "I know." Emily leaned forward. "So you're buying a house? Alone?" "Yes." She gave a small, baffled laugh. "Wow. Okay." I didn't push. I didn't elaborate. And that might have been the real turning point, because instead of inviting their feedback, I shut the door politely but firmly, and they felt it. 3 days later, the first text came from my mom, Rachel. I found a beautiful home in Castle Rock. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, huge kitchen, great schools. Sending the link now. A few hours later, one from Emily. "This one has a yard and an office. You would have space for the kids when we visit. It's so perfect." Then came the emails. My dad sent mortgage calculators and tax articles. My mom sent listings, not in Telluride, but in Highlands Ranch, Parker, even Fort Collins again. Each one bigger, more expensive, more family-oriented. They were all in the kind of neighborhoods with playgrounds on every block and HOA fees that covered annual Easter egg hunts. None of them looked like the life I had built. At first, I replied with polite deflection, "That one's too big. I'm looking for something quieter." "Thanks, but I already have a few places in mind." But they didn't stop. And then came the call. I was at work, headphones on. Halfway through, I was building a portfolio projection when my mom's name lit up my phone. I answered, expecting a quick question. Rachel, she said, voice bright but edged. You've got to check out the house on Bluebell Lane. The owners are moving overseas. They're dropping the price. I'm not looking in Castle Rock, I said gently. But, sweetie, she continued, it has a playroom. A whole room you could turn into a little nook for the kids when they stay over. Ava and Max would love it. My grip on the phone tightened. Mom, they're not staying over. There was a pause. A shift in tone. Well, maybe not right away, she said. But think ahead. You don't want to be living in some tiny cottage when you could? I do want the cottage, I said, firmer now. I want quiet. I want space. I don't need more than 2 bedrooms. She laughed softly, almost pitying. Oh, honey, you think you don't, but you will. And that's when it dawned on me. The looks at dinner, the questions, the listings, the sudden intense interest. This wasn't about helping me. This was about using me. They weren't just encouraging me to buy a house. They were planning for it, planning around it, planning to be in it. And not once had anyone asked me what I wanted, not what kind of home I dreamed of, not what peace meant to me, not what 7 years of saving were supposed to lead to. Just assumptions, built on a lifetime of believing I'd always make room, always bend, always sacrifice. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The quiet of my apartment felt different, less safe, more endangered. I thought of the house in Telluride, the trellis, the way the morning sun hit the bedroom window, the way the porch curved like arms offering rest. And I made my decision. I would sign. I would move forward without asking, just like they had. I would not allow my dream to be repurposed into someone else's solution. The next morning, I called the agent. I'm ready. I said, let's start the offer. The paperwork came later that afternoon. I printed every page, read it twice, and signed with a hand that didn't shake. The moment I hit send, a calm fell over me, not the absence of fear, but the presence of resolve. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because something told me. The storm was coming. And when it did, I needed to be standing firmly in the center of my own life. It started quietly. Not with confrontation, but with strategy. Not with anyone asking me to reconsider, but with everyone assuming I would. 3 days after I signed the offer on the house in Telluride, my mother texted me a photo of a grand 4-bedroom home with a manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. It was the kind of place that echoed, the kind of house you bought to impress someone, the kind you bought not for peace, but for proof. She wrote, just spoke with Susan from church. This house on Cedar Hills just went on the market. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, even a swing set already in the backyard. Perfect for family. There it was. No question mark. No, what do you think? Just perfect. For family. I didn't reply. Later that night, Emily sent me a string of links. One in particular came with a voice message. This one's amazing. Rach. Huge living room. An actual study for you to work in. You'd be close to us. And honestly, the kids would go nuts in that yard. I mean, if you're going to buy, why not think a little bigger? Bigger? That word repeated in my mind, like an accusation. Bigger than what? Than my own dreams? My own needs? For every listing I ignored, 3 more arrived. Some had notes from my mom, praising the school districts. Some included messages from Emily suggesting how we could make it work together. One even had a little comment from Chris, who never usually spoke much, saying, the kids would finally get their own rooms. Just think about it. I began to notice patterns. The suggestions were no longer generic. They were strategic. suburban locations, proximity to Emily's current apartment, features geared toward children, family-centric neighborhoods. The implications were no longer subtle. It wasn't about me finding a home. It was about them finding a solution. Through me, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront anyone. But the silence started to turn heavy. One night, I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed, sat at my kitchen table, and began writing in my journal, a practice I hadn't touched in weeks. I wrote one sentence. They've already decided what my life should look like. And then, beneath that, another, what if I don't agree? The next Sunday dinner confirmed everything I feared. I almost didn't go. But guilt, that old familiar weight, pulled me into the car. I showed up, greeted Ava and Max with a hug, brought a bottle of wine like always, sat down at the table like always, smiled like nothing had changed. But something had. Halfway through the meal, my mom looked up and said, "So, the Maple Street house? They dropped the price again. It's a steal now." I blinked. "I told you, I'm not interested in that area." My dad leaned forward. "Rachel, you've got to be practical. You live alone. What do you even need all that quiet for?" Emily chimed in with her usual charm disguised as concern. "You're going to be rattling around in that little cabin by yourself while we're still here drowning? Doesn't it make more sense to just share some of that space?" I set my fork down. "Share?" I asked, looking at her directly. She shrugged. "We're not asking for the whole thing. Just a little support. The kids need space. We need space. You already work from home. It's not like you're entertaining every night." The air shifted. The room wasn't warm anymore. My mother's voice cut through. "You can't just make these decisions without thinking of the family. That's not how we raised you." Something in me snapped, not loudly, not visibly. It was internal, a thread tearing quietly after years of strain. "I didn't ask anyone to raise me this way," I said. Emily set her wine glass down harder than necessary. "You're seriously going to let us struggle while you live like a hermit in a dream cabin? That's selfish. Rachel, we're your family." There it was. Selfish. It always comes down to that, doesn't it? The moment you choose yourself after years of being chosen last, the moment you say no instead of yes, maybe, or sure, I can help, you become selfish. I stood up. "I'm not handing over my life to clean up someone else's choices." I said quietly, "I'm done being the backup plan." My dad's voice was low, disapproving. "Rachel, that's not fair. Neither is planning my life without me." I answered. Chris looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "If it's about the space, I can help renovate, make it feel like yours again. I'm good with that kind of stuff." I turned to Emily. "Did you ever plan to ask me, or did you just assume?" She didn't answer, didn't blink, just said, "You're more than capable. We're stuck. You're not." My hands were trembling, not from rage, but from heartbreak. "You've never once asked what I wanted," I said. "And now that I finally have something I built, you're angry that I won't give it away. You're tearing this family apart over a house." My mom said, "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself from a family that doesn't believe I deserve anything of my own." And I walked out. That night, the phone calls started, first from my mom, 3 missed calls in a row, then a message, long and emotionally charged. "You're being ridiculous. You don't turn your back on blood. Family is not optional." I stared at my phone until the screen went dark. The next day, Emily sent a message. "So that's it? You're choosing solitude over your niece and nephew? You think a garden is more important than your own family?" It wasn't about gardens. It was about dignity. It was about finally choosing something for myself and refusing to be guilted into giving it away. I didn't respond. That week, I packed in silence. Books, sweaters, framed prints I'd bought from local artists over the years. Every item felt like a line I was drawing, a reclaiming of space I had once surrendered. But the part that hurt most wasn't the yelling or the manipulation. It was the absence of one simple question. Not once did any of them say, "Rachel, are you happy?" Not once did they ask what my life actually looked like, what I wanted for myself, what I'd hoped to feel when I finally walked into a home that was mine. To them, my dream was just another asset to be redistributed. And I couldn't let that happen. When I left Boulder for Telluride, I didn't tell them the date. I changed my number. I shut down social media. I forwarded my mail to the new address and told only the 3 people in my life who had never once asked me to shrink myself to make them more comfortable. I was leaving a storm of expectations behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. I didn't cry when I left Boulder. I thought I would. But when I handed my keys to the landlord, took one last look at the empty space that had held my quiet routines for 6 years, I felt only stillness, like I'd finally stepped out of a waiting room and into the rest of my life. The drive to Telluride was long and silent. I had no music playing, no GPS instructions blaring through the car, just the sound of tires humming on the pavement and the wind flicking past the windows. It felt like a cleanse, every mile pulling me further from the guilt, the disappointment, the 1,000 silent compromises I had made for the comfort of others. The moving truck arrived early the next morning. I had timed everything down to the hour. No lingering, no delays. I had paid the crew in full, tipped generously, and labeled every box with obsessive precision. I didn't want chaos. I didn't want conversation. I just wanted a clean start. When I stepped into the cottage, my cottage, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The space was smaller than what anyone had suggested. Modest. Lived in. The floors creaked in certain spots, and the walls had tiny imperfections that made them feel more human than drywall ever should. The fireplace was real stone. The shelves had been sanded by hand, and the porch overlooked not another house, but a stretch of pine trees that swayed without needing applause. This was mine. The first thing I did wasn't unpack. It wasn't setting up Wi-Fi or sorting the kitchen. It was walking barefoot into the backyard. The grass was uneven and the garden beds were mostly dry soil and weeds, but I could see it. The vision I had carried for years. Tomatoes in the raised beds, lavender along the fence, a small compost bin, maybe even a few sunflowers just for color. I knelt down and touched the soil. It crumbled in my fingers, dry but not lifeless. Like me, it needed time and care, not saving, just space to become. Over the next few days, I unpacked slowly, one room at a time. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let the house speak first. I arranged my books by theme, memoir, essays, fiction, finance. I placed a framed photo of my college graduation on the mantle. It was the only event from my 20s I'd celebrated alone. And still, the pride in my smile made it worth displaying. By the end of the week, I had a rhythm. Mornings started with coffee on the porch. Midday meant work, remote meetings, project planning, budgeting models for the firm. Evenings were slow, often spent with my hands in the dirt or in the kitchen. I cooked more than I ever had, not because I had to, but because no one was there to interrupt the joy of it. I played soft instrumental music and found that I liked cooking for one. It felt intimate, intentional. The town of Telluride, as I remembered, was quiet but not empty. People waved when you walked by. Cashiers asked how your day was and waited for an actual answer. I joined a community garden group one Saturday. It was hosted in a woman's backyard, Grace, mid-50s, gentle, sharp-eyed, and with a lavender bush that smelled like summer distilled into scent. She didn't ask why I moved here. She only asked what I wanted to grow. Basil, I said, and tomatoes, maybe peppers. She smiled and handed me a tray of seedlings. Start here. At that same gathering, I met Eli. He wasn't flashy. He had calloused hands and a quiet way of standing like he belonged wherever he was. Someone mentioned he was a landscape photographer. Later, he said he also helped people fix irrigation systems in exchange for dinner and conversation. I told him my backyard was a mess. He said he liked a challenge. The following Thursday, he came by with a toolkit and a bag of wildflower seeds. I made lentil stew, and we sat on the porch afterward, watching the light fade into a dusky pink. He didn't ask about my family, he didn't pry. He asked what I miss most about childhood. I thought about it, then said, the feeling that I could want something without being punished for it? He nodded like he understood, and then we fell into a silence that felt more like rest than discomfort. Work, too, began to shift in subtle but powerful ways. Without the emotional weight of constant family conflict, I found my mind clearer, more creative. I proposed a new initiative for financial literacy training at the firm, an online course aimed at women starting over after financial setbacks. Divorcees, widows, single moms. It was approved within a week. My manager, Karen, called me personally. Rachel, this is exactly the kind of leadership we need. I'm recommending you for a raise, and I want you to train our new hires. Your approach, steady, thoughtful, it's rare. I didn't know how to respond at first, not because I was ungrateful, but because I had grown so used to being the invisible one, the dependable one, the utility player who never needed praise. But now, my work was being seen not just as competent, but as visionary. Saturdays became sacred. I biked to the farmer's market with a basket and a notebook. I bought heirloom carrots and chatted with a vendor about composting. One afternoon, I helped a little girl pick the right onion for her mom's stew. Her mom invited me to a local library book club. I said yes before I could second-guess myself. These were not grand, sweeping moments. They were small, consistent affirmations. A life stitched together by peace, not panic, by curiosity, not obligation. I began to laugh more, not performative laughter, quiet ones that came from deep in the belly. I began to notice the way the light hit the kitchen table at 7:45 a.m., the smell of fresh thyme when crushed between fingers, the joy of finding the perfect chair for the reading nook in my bedroom. One night, I sat by the fireplace reading when a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked against the sky, and the rain came fast, drumming on the roof like a heartbeat. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel alone. I felt protected, not by the house, by the choice I made. A few days later, Eli returned to help me trim the branches that were blocking sunlight over the herb bed. He stayed for tea and told me about a hawk he'd photographed near the canyon. He didn't talk much, and neither did I. But when he left, I found a small packet of seeds on my porch with a note. For the west wall, needs morning light. I planted them without needing to know what they would grow into. That was the thing about this chapter of my life. I didn't need guarantees. I just needed space, time, soil that wasn't already claimed. I hadn't spoken to my family in weeks. I didn't miss the tension. I missed Ava's laugh. Sometimes. I missed the sound of my dad humming in the kitchen when he thought no one was listening. But I didn't miss the version of me they had carved out without permission. Here, I was no one's backup plan, no one's fixer, no one's sacrifice. I was just Rachel. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The knock at the door came on a cold Saturday morning, just as I was pouring hot water over a mesh basket of rooibos tea. It had been a quiet morning, the kind I'd come to treasure. A gray sky hung over the pine trees, and a soft wind whispered through the herb garden outside. I assumed it was Eli or maybe Grace, dropping by early with seed cuttings or a weather warning. But when I opened the door, the wind brought in something entirely different. It was Emily. Her coat looked too thin for the weather. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from something deeper, shame, maybe, or exhaustion. Her hair was pulled back messily, and her hands clutched the strap of a faded tote bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Behind her, Ava and Max stood close together, silent, their eyes wide and uncharacteristically quiet. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. I wasn't sure I was still allowed to knock, she said, her voice soft, frayed at the edges. I hadn't seen them since the dinner, since I'd walked away, since I'd turned off my phone and chose silence over explanation. I didn't invite them in, but I didn't shut the door either. We stood there like that for a moment, a family held together by the barest thread of shared blood and something else, something fragile and breaking. Then Ava, her voice no louder than a leaf touching the ground, looked up at me and said, "Aunt Rachel, Mom said if we were really good, we could see your flower garden." I crouched to her level, my throat tight. "I just planted white chrysanthemums. Do you like those?" She nodded, and something in her eyes, a spark, a trust, made me step aside. They walked in, not as guests, not as family, as people seeking shelter they had not earned, but still needed. The house held its breath. I poured tea and set out honey without a word. Emily sat with her back straight, like someone waiting for a verdict. The kids wandered the edges of the living room, speaking in hushed tones, touching things carefully as if afraid their presence might undo the peace of the space. We didn't talk for a while. We just existed in the same space for the first time in what felt like years. And then Emily spoke. "I thought you'd always take care of everything," she said, not looking at me. "That's what Mom taught us, that you were the strong one, the one who made space." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to respond to a confession dressed as a compliment. "But you were right," she continued. "It wasn't fair. I didn't see it before. I was so used to being the one everyone ran to. I didn't realize how much it cost you." I stared at the steam rising from my cup. "You didn't just assume I'd help. You made plans around me. You didn't ask. You expected. There's a difference." "I know," she said. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her mug. "I wasn't angry you needed help," I added. "I was angry that no one cared what I needed, that no one asked what this house meant to me." She looked up, eyes glassy but steady. "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of being alone. Of failing my kids. Of admitting I wasn't as strong as everyone thought I was." "That doesn't make what you did okay," I said. "I know." We sat in silence again, the weight of unspoken things pressing down between us. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, Max quietly picked up a small ceramic fox from my bookshelf and held it out to Ava like it was treasure. "They don't know," Emily said, watching them. "About the details, about the fight. I just told them we weren't invited anymore." I didn't say anything. "I wanted to be angry at you," she continued. "Mom still is. But I couldn't. Because you didn't shut the door forever. You just asked for something we never gave you. Space. That word. Space. The one I'd clung to like a lifeline. The thing I had worked years to finally claim. I'm not looking for forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want to keep pretending like none of it happened. And the kids, when they asked about you, I couldn't keep lying." I watched her, really watched her. She looked like someone who had walked a long road barefoot and only now realized she'd been bleeding the whole way. "I don't hate you," I said. "But I don't trust you either. Not yet." She nodded. "That's fair." We didn't hug. There were no grand gestures, just tea, a soft fireplace glow, and the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, we were both capable of change. They left after an hour. Ava hugged me tightly. Max waved, his mittened hand flapping like a bird. Emily didn't say goodbye. She just gave me a look, part sorrow, part gratitude, and walked back into the wind. 3 weeks later, I took Ava and Max to the town's book fair. Emily had asked if I'd be willing. Just this once. I said yes, mostly for the kids, but also because I was curious. Curious if time had done anything at all. The fair was warm and chaotic, the smell of cider and fresh ink in the air. The kids ran between booths, giggling, picking out books with titles about dragons and dinosaurs and dreams. Near the edge of the fair, under a maple tree, Eli stood surrounded by paints and paper, teaching a watercolor workshop for kids. Max ran to him instantly. Ava followed, settling onto the ground like she'd always belonged there. Eli caught my eye and smiled. These two look like they've already staked their claim on Telluride. I smiled back. Looks like they found their corner. He didn't ask anything more. He never did. And that, more than anything, made me feel safe. Later that evening, as I tucked the books into a canvas bag, Ava handed me a folded note. Mom wrote this, but I helped. I unfolded it at home, sitting by the window as dusk settled into the mountains. The note read, I'm looking for a new job, not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know I'm managing now. On my own. Thank you for not slamming the door shut. Below that, a line in crayon. Clearly Ava's. She still messes up ginger tea, but I'm teaching her Yes. Did you plant more purple chrysanthemums? I held the paper in my hands and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but something close to peace. Sometimes, growth isn't about becoming better for someone else. It's about becoming better for yourself. And sometimes, when you do that long enough, the people who took you for granted start to show up not for what they can take, but for what they've learned. That night, I stood in the garden under the moonlight. The chrysanthemums were blooming again, tall, strong, and just a little wild. I wasn't sure where the story would go next, but for the first time in a long while, I was okay with not knowing. A week after the book fair, a message appeared in my inbox from Human Resources. The subject line was straightforward. Reference check, Vanessa Marks. I blinked. The name wasn't familiar. Then I read further, and my breath caught. Vanessa Marks was Emily's full legal name. I had forgotten, or maybe never fully known. She was applying for a position in the internal financial training program at my company. I clicked open the application. At the bottom, under relevant guidance or mentorship, she had listed, guided informally by Rachel Marks, independent advisor. I froze. She hadn't asked me for a recommendation. She hadn't warned me. And yet there it was, my name, not as an obligation, but as a recognition. Further down, she had quoted something I'd written on my professional blog nearly a year earlier. I'd forgotten the post even existed. It read, everyone deserves a fresh start, but you have to take that first step on your own. That quote had come from a place of personal grief. I had written it on a day I felt particularly exhausted by the emotional weight of being the dependable one. I never imagined it would end up in a job application from the sister I had once cut off. I didn't respond to HR right away. I went outside instead, stood barefoot in my garden, and watched the wind shake through the tall pines. There was no resolution in the air, no movie-ending swell of music, but there was clarity. Emily had not asked for a handout. She had simply named me as part of her journey, quietly, respectfully. That evening, as the sky turned purple, I spotted something on the wooden fence near my front gate, a small piece of notepaper clipped with a clothespin. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Ava's, still lopsided and messy, but filled with the kind of earnestness only children can carry. The note read, Aunt Rachel, I helped Mom write her resume. I think she's trying really hard, just like you. She still doesn't drink ginger tea the right way, but I'm teaching her. Pete, did you plant more purple chrysanthemums? Because they're my favorite. I didn't cry, but I did sit down on the porch steps and let the paper rest in my lap for a long time. The garden swayed with wind, and somewhere in the trees, a robin called out. It felt like the earth was nodding with quiet approval. The next morning, I brewed 2 cups of tea, 1 ginger, 1 mint. I sat by the window and thought about what boundaries really meant. They weren't walls, they weren't punishments. They were invitations to come differently, to approach with humility instead of expectation. Emily had finally knocked, not with desperation, not with entitlement, but with a gentle gesture of change. And I wasn't going to rush forgiveness, but I also wasn't going to close the door that had finally been respected. 3 weeks later, she officially joined the training program. I saw her in the building lobby one morning, dressed professionally, her hair tied back, holding a notebook to her chest like armor. She didn't wave, didn't try to hug me. She simply made eye contact, nodded once, and walked toward the elevator. It was the kind of acknowledgement that says more than words. It said, I remember what I did. I honor your space. I'm here to grow, not to intrude. I nodded back. That was all. Telluride was slowly shifting into winter. The air had a crispness that hinted at snow, and the local library had started preparing for the holiday book club. Grace, from the gardening group, invited me to host next month's discussion. We chose a novel about self-reinvention. It felt appropriate. Meanwhile, my weekends with Eli became more consistent. Not defined, not titled, just comfortable. Sometimes he'd bring oranges from a nearby farm, sometimes leftover soup he'd made in a cast-iron pot. He never asked about Emily, never probed. But once, as we walked the ridge behind my house, he said, You carry things like someone who had to learn not to drop them. I looked at him. I'm learning to set things down now. He didn't respond, just offered me a wildflower he'd picked from the path. One Friday evening, I found another basket on my porch. Oranges again, and a few sprigs of dried rosemary. No note this time, just presence, just understanding. I took it inside, placed the fruit in a bowl, and lit a candle. I had finally learned how to mark a moment, not with drama, but with ritual, with attention, with warmth. Around this time, I was asked to speak at a community event about financial independence for women. It was held at the local town hall, modest in size but packed with eager faces. I stood on the small stage and told a version of my story, not naming names, not dwelling on the pain, but focusing on the power of saying no, of protecting your peace, of learning that boundaries are not barriers to love, but pathways to it. After the event, a woman in her 60s came up to me, eyes glossy. My daughter stopped speaking to me 2 years ago, she said. Hearing you today made me realize I never really listened to what she needed. I only saw what I expected. I held her hand and said, There's still time, but you have to show her you're ready to hear her now. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace and reread Ava's note for the 5th time. There was something about that child's simple joy that softened the last pieces of anger I had been clutching. Maybe, just maybe, the love I still carried for my family didn't have to be erased. It only needed to be protected. Not long after, I received a letter, not a text, not an email, from my father. The handwriting was unmistakable, short, blunt, but honest. I didn't understand before. I do now. If you're ever ready to talk again, I'll be here. No strings. There were no strings, and for once, no pressure, just space. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't feel obligated to. But I tucked the letter into my journal and made a mental note to keep the door cracked. Not wide open, but not locked either. The garden was dormant now. Snow had dusted the ground, and the wind moved differently through bare branches. But underneath it all, life was waiting. Seeds already planted, roots already strong. I walked the path behind the cottage one last time before the snow settled thick. The sky was clear, stars scattered like answers I didn't need anymore. I wasn't just living alone, I was living true. Every inch of the home, every shelf, every herb in the window box had been chosen. By me, for the kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained, only felt. And here's what I know now. Family is not the people who share your blood. It's the ones who learn how to knock, who learn how to listen, who understand that love, when it is real, never demands entry. It waits. Eli once told me that the strongest trees aren't the tallest. They're the ones that learned how to bend without breaking. I am that tree. And as I sit here, the fire crackling behind me, the wind brushing softly against the window, I know this story doesn't end with reconciliation. It doesn't need to. It ends with restoration, with the quiet kind of healing that doesn't require a spotlight. I chose myself, and somehow, in that choice, the right people found their way to my door, not because they expected to be let in, but because, finally, they knew to ask. Rachel's story was never really about a house. It was about space, both literal and emotional. It was about the long, quiet war so many of us fight within our own families. The war between duty and identity, between being supportive and being consumed. From the outside, her life might have seemed uneventful, even unremarkable. A financial advisor in Boulder, Colorado, who lived modestly, avoided drama, and saved diligently. But behind that calm exterior was a woman wrestling with something deeply universal, the desire to be seen as more than just useful. For years, Rachel played the role of the dependable one, the background hero, the one who never needed much and therefore never received much. Her sister Emily, vibrant and magnetic, had long commanded attention and sympathy. Rachel, in contrast, was the one who always showed up, always adapted, always made space for others. But that invisible work, done in silence, had consequences. It hollowed her out in ways she didn't even realize until it was almost too late. The house in Telluride represented more than a personal milestone. It was a line in the sand, a symbol of years of sacrifice, discipline, and deferred desires. It was supposed to be a reward for her commitment to herself. But when her family assumed ownership over that space, physically, emotionally, and symbolically, Rachel was forced to confront a bitter truth. Love, when wrapped in entitlement, stops being love, it becomes control. When her family tried to repurpose her dream into a solution for Emily's problems, Rachel faced a decision many people never find the courage to make. She could sacrifice her future to keep the peace, to play the good daughter and sister, to continue the quiet erasure of her needs, or she could risk being called selfish, ungrateful, even cruel, by finally saying no. She chose herself. And in that choice, she didn't just buy a house. She reclaimed her voice. But growth is rarely linear. Even after her move, the scars lingered. The silence was heavy. The guilt ever present. It wasn't a clean break. It was a lonely road with no guarantees. Still, Rachel leaned into the discomfort. She tended to her new life the way one tends to a garden, gently, patiently, with no expectation of instant bloom. And little by little, life began to respond. Her work flourished. Her relationships became intentional. She met people who didn't ask her to shrink, who didn't define her by what she could give. And most importantly, she found comfort in her own company. When Emily returned, not with demands, but with humility, it didn't undo the past, but it acknowledged it. The real power of Rachel's story lies in that fragile, unspoken recognition. Forgiveness wasn't given as a prize. It was offered as a door slightly ajar, not wide open, but enough to let light in. Emily began changing, not through promises, but through action. And Rachel, while still protective of her peace, began to let love back in, on her own terms. The lesson here is both painful and liberating. Boundaries are not betrayals. They are the truest form of love, for ourselves and for those we care about. Without them, we lose not only our identity, but also our ability to connect honestly. Rachel's story teaches us that you can honor your family without surrendering your soul, that sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, it's the first step toward healing. In today's world, where so many of us are stretched thin by expectation and guilt, this story feels especially urgent. How many times have we said yes when we meant no? How often have we sacrificed our peace to avoid being labeled difficult, selfish, or cold? How many dreams have we postponed because someone else's needs screamed louder than our own? Rachel's journey reminds us that we owe no one our silence, that choosing solitude over dysfunction isn't a failure, it's self-respect. And that real family, chosen or born, is made up of people who ask before they take, who listen before they advise, who knock before they enter. If you've been moved by this story, we want to hear from you. Imagine you're in Rachel's shoes. You've spent years building a dream, only for your family to assume they're entitled to it. What would you do? Would you, A, compromise and try to balance your dream with their expectations, even if it means giving up part of what you wanted? B, stand firm, protect your boundaries, and risk being misunderstood for choosing yourself? Comment your answer, A or B, below. Let us know how you would handle a situation where your peace is at odds with your family's demands. And more than that, share your thoughts. What resonated most with you in Rachel's journey? Was there a moment that mirrored something from your own life? Your perspective could help someone else who's still in the thick of it, unsure whether their boundaries are worth defending. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful, honest stories that matter, stories that make us think, feel, and maybe even change. With every new subscriber, we get closer to building a community where boundaries are honored, voices are respected, and healing is possible. This story might be over, but the conversation is just beginning. What did you learn from Rachel? And more importantly, what will you do differently from today? We'll be here, listening, and ready to bring you the next story that just might change the way you see your own.